Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, I thought that I would review this little video today that I found very, very interesting. This video, all in all, is by this one channel called AKHi TV. And I reviewed AKHi TV quite a bit when it comes down to it because the reason why that is, and some people, once again, I get certain new people on my channel that always ask, why do you review, others' videos, or, why do you need a helper and all this other stuff? You should do your own stuff. Well, I do my own stuff here and there. When it comes down to it, I like to review other videos here and there, and I also like to do my own stuff. I do a mix of everything on here. But when it comes down to it, all in all, the reason why I like to review sometimes other people's videos is for certain people, all in all, to see firsthand what they have to say and all in all what their opinion is. Because a big part of the reason why I started doing YouTube again when it came down to it, especially on boxing talk and sports talk, now I don't just review other people's channels. I review also certain sports talk shows like Skip and Shannon Undisputed or ESPN First Take. Sometimes, First Things First, I believe. It's is that the one with Acho and Marcellus Wiley, or is that the one with Nick Wright? I can't remember. Anyways, that might be the one with Nick Wright. Or Speak for Yourself is the one that I'm thinking of. The one with Marcellus Wiley. Okay. I like to review every single one of those. But also when it comes down to it, when it comes to boxing talk, I do like to review certain channels. Maybe it may be Dante's Boxing Nation. Maybe it may be AKHi TV. Maybe it may be another boxing channel. But whenever I usually review a video, it's because I think that there is something important to take away from it. Because some of these people, when it comes down to it, they are so off kilter. They are so out of reality that it really is almost crazy when it comes down to it. But the LDBC and new media, as I've already explained in the past, I believe them to be a pro-black cult, and there's a lot of evidence for that when it comes down to it. It really doesn't take, a rocket scientist to know overall what they're about. It is what it is. But I understand all in all why they became what they became, or why they think they needed to become that. I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing to come up with your own platform and try to cover black fighters in a positive way. But when it comes to the point, all in all, to where you're very clearly racially biased, to the point to where you're just another overall evil of the media, or overall, when it comes down to another very, very, very biased object in the media, I don't think you're really helping anybody. It is what it is. But, it's whatever. That's their business. But I do like to review some of their videos here and there just to get some of the opinions overall and just to kind of debate it a little bit back and forth. But when it comes down to it, we're going to review this video in which AKHi TV, he talks about Shakur Stevenson being called a boring fighter. And all in all, AKHi TV, I don't tend to agree with him very often. But some of the things that he does say in this video, I will say that I do tend to agree with. So let's get into it. Let's see what he has to say, and let's tune in.
Against this exposure, or don't be surprised if people start calling you a boring fighter.
I feel like it's just an awkward fight, so he's coming in looking for one big punch. He got a lot of power. He was definitely one of the strongest fighters I ever faced. But I got the job done. I won every round. I dominated the fight. Every fight ain't gonna be how you like it. Every fight ain't gonna be won in a pretty fashion. There's gonna be some ugly wins that you get, and you gotta take it.
So after Shakur Stevenson put on one of the most dominant and exciting fights of the year against the longest reigning 130-pound champion in Jamal Herring, where Shakur threw 7 punches combo and won via TKO. Even then, fans flooded my page with the comments you guys see above. Luis Angel said, quote, "Who won on the Stevenson versus Herring fight? I fell asleep on the second round." End of the quote. Alexander Hernandez said, quote,
"It's very unfortunate overall that, of course, a certain amount of people think that Stevenson is a boring fighter. Now, I do get it that some people, I don't know, they think that defensive fighters that, they can be a bit more boring. But I've never been a person, all in all, that has truly believed that. Some of my favorite fighters of all time tend to be more defensive fighters, or fighters, all in all, that a lot of their fights, they have fought on the back foot. Whether that be Sugar Ray Leonard or Floyd Mayweather Jr., I'm not necessarily going to say Alexander Usyk, because Alexander Usyk, he does fight on the back foot here and there, but he likes to pressure you a lot of the times as well. That's mainly where he's good at. He does have some limitations sometimes when he fights on the back foot, even though, he can fight on the back foot. But, it is what it is. But, Araceli Lara is another one of my favorite fighters all in all to watch. Guillermo Rigondeaux, unfortunately, I don't think that he's really the same fighter that he used to be, and unfortunately that tends to happen with Cuban fighters once they get a little bit older in age. I mean, of course that happens to everyone when they get a little bit older in age, but, their style almost changes completely, and once they get to that age of about 35 and upwards, it's very unfortunate, but it is what it is. But when it comes down to it, like I said, there's very few fighters in the history of boxing that I would personally call boring. Now, I think all in all that there is boring matchups. I'm not really a person all in all that likes the matchup overall to where I think that there's going to be a clear winner. And what I mean by that is that take Gervonta Tank Davis versus Rolly Romero, for example. A lot of people, they may be excited for that fight. I'm not really excited for that fight at all. And I believe it's going to be on pay-per-view. That's not really a fight overall that I'm really going to waste my money on. Now, if you want to buy it, go ahead. I'm not trying to deter anyone away from buying it if you want to buy it. If you want to go ahead and do that, if you want to watch it, go ahead. But unless there's some excellent undercards on there, I just don't think that it's really worth my time. And the reason why I say that is because, Rolly Romero, he's a physically talented fighter, but he's not an A-grade fighter. He's a very, very raw fighter. He's a fighter all in all that is just very, very, his skills need a lot of work. Let me just say that. It is what it is. It's kind of like a lot of people I've been hearing, they compare him to Ricardo Mayorga. Now, sure, Ricardo Mayorga, he was someone that he talked a lot of trash, and he was a champion in a couple of divisions. So, at least I believe that he was. If I'm wrong about that, then someone correct me. But I know for sure he was a champion in the welterweight division. I think maybe he would have been a champion in one other division as well. But if I'm wrong, correct me. But when it comes down to it all in all, sure, Ricardo Mayorga, he's someone that's somewhat entertaining to watch because he talks a lot of shit. But if you're watching someone all in all that, that can really box and Ricardo Mayorga is facing them, let's be real. Is that really going to be a very entertaining fight? Like when he fought Oscar De La Hoya, Felix Tito Trinidad, and Miguel Cotto, when he fought all those guys, were any of those really super duper entertaining fights? So, that's the only time where I'll say, okay, that's boring, because that's not a matchup overall that I really want to see. It is what it is. But Shakur Stevenson versus Jamel Herring, that was an excellent fight. I don't personally believe that Jamel Herring is an A-grade fighter, but the reason why the fight had so much appeal is because this was going to be Shakur Stevenson's biggest test. Of course, looking on the surface, Shakur Stevenson looks like the more talented fighter in almost every single category, but we needed to see it firsthand. Now we know for certain that he can handle someone of a Jamel Herring caliber. Maybe next he can fight an Oscar Valdez. Maybe next he can face a Vasily Lomachenko or someone at 135 if he decides to go up there. Maybe he can fight a Leo Santa Cruz. I would love to see a Leo Santa Cruz fight, although unfortunately I don't think that would happen right now because Leo Santa Cruz, he's kind of, not only do I believe that he probably would not be interested in that fight, but Leo Santa Cruz, I believe all in all, he fights with Showtime. So that would be interesting, but we'll just have to see what Shakur Stevenson plans next.
They're good but boring. No power, no dropping people. End of the quote. Another person said, quote, "Who won? I fell asleep." So, y'all get the point. This is the narrative they wanted to paint when it comes to Shakur Stevenson, which mainly there's 4 people to blame. Mark Kriegel, the racist decaf wizard, who actually started all of this. Tessitore, Timothy Uncle Tom Bradley, that follows Tessitore lead, and last but not least, Shakur Stevenson. If you may wonder, why is Shakur...
It's so interesting how AKHi TV, he calls Timothy Bradley and Uncle Tom. When it comes down, I sometimes talk about certain racial demographics or certain racial things on my channel, all in all, but I don't think I would ever call, a black man all in all an Uncle Tom, because I just don't think that overall that would be my place. I'm not going to do that. Even if I thought maybe they were maybe sucking up to the company, I don't think all in all that I would ever do that, because I just don't think all in all that it would ever be my place. But AKHi TV, for whatever reason, because he has this big pro-black cult following, he just thinks overall that he basically can say whatever he wants. AKHi TV, on the inside, he really wants to be a black man. He claims overall to be super huge into his Muslim culture, but he really wishes that he was a black man. You can tell overall by the way that he talks, and all in all, the racial overall bias that he has overall, you can just tell. Now, maybe he does have some Afro ethnicity in him. I'm not sure, because when you take a look at AKHi TV, when you take a look at some of his features, maybe it's possible. But a certain amount of Arabs as well, they also have that really curly hair and sometimes darker skin as well. So who knows?
Well, while old media was painting the narrative that Shakur is a boring fighter, Shakur decided to grab the brush and paint along with them. Check this out.
Yeah, she doesn't mess around, but neither did you tonight. What was it about your performance that made you happiest?
I want to thank Tim Bradley. Tim Bradley was criticizing me, calling me boring.
And you notice that they'll call Andre Ward a company man, but these guys, these channels, they won't call Andre Ward an Uncle Tom. And the reason why that is because Andre Ward, they have to speak positively about him. Because Andre Ward was one of the great fighters of his time. Andre Ward was looked at as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world at one point in time. Timothy Bradley, so many of these guys like Dante's Boxing Nation and AKHi TV, they always try to tell you that first Timothy Bradley-Manny Pacquiao fight was really close. But then when Timothy Bradley says something about a black fighter that they tend not to like, all of a sudden their true colors start to show, especially about what they thought about that Timothy Bradley-Manny Pacquiao fight, which in all reality, it really wasn't that close. Timothy Bradley never should have won that first fight. I'm sorry. I remember scoring that fight about 8 rounds to 4. Maybe I'll have to rewatch it because it has been a while, but I doubt that my opinion would change. That is probably one of the worst robberies that I've seen within the past 10 years, at least. No doubt about it.
So I wanted a fun fight. I wanted to perform.
My point being is this. They can't necessarily say the same thing about Andre Ward because they like to put Andre Ward in GOAT conversations. But they know they can't do that with Timothy Bradley because even though Timothy Bradley was a decently great fighter, and I believe even at one point in time was one of the top 10 pound-for-pound fighters in the world, he was not on the Andre Ward level. So they'll talk all the shit that they want to on Timothy Bradley, but when it comes to Andre Ward, all of a sudden, they won't do it.
My skills, show my boxing skill, my defense, my power. I showed everything tonight.
You did. What was most impressive is you were standing in front of Jamel Herring, and much like you have been able to do throughout your career, you were unhittable for...
I guess apologizing to the fans as if he committed a crime wasn't enough for Shakur. He also had to thank Timothy Bradley for stating that he almost went to sleep watching him fight, which by doing so, Shakur Stevenson put a green light on his head to be criticized by old media as a boring fighter for the rest of his career. Even if Shakur wins his next 10 fights by knockout in a row, Mike Tyson style, then has one lackluster performance, that's when they will automatically criticize him and remind him that he's a boring fighter. Time will tell. However, we don't even have to wait that long, because that's what they did to Shakur against Jamaya. They automatically forgot about all of the other fights prior to the Jamaya fight where Shakur was throwing 5 to 6 punches combo. The moment he has a...
Well, listen, what I will say is this. Shakur Stevenson, now he did whoop up on Jamel Herring, and he should be very proud of that performance. He did very, very well. Very, very well. He has nothing to be ashamed of that performance. But let's also be a little bit real about, Shakur Stevenson. He's not really what we would call a knockout artist. He's not really going to be someone all in all that is knocking out these elite opponents, in my opinion. He's probably not going to knock out a lot of the elite 135-pounders or even some of the elite 130-pounders. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but Shakur Stevenson, he doesn't necessarily have the worst punching power that I've ever seen, but I certainly would not call it A grade. It is what it is. So we'll see what happens. But Shakur Stevenson, he's going to have to let that, roll off his shoulders. He's going to have to, just be him. Don't worry about what the crowd says.
Lackluster performance, they label him as a boring fighter, which, if this reoccurs, where it most likely will, I'm referring to Tessitore and Mark Kriegel calling Shakur boring, then Shakur Stevenson has no one to blame but himself. If you may wonder why that is, it's because of the obvious fact. Instead of Shakur Stevenson calling out the racial double standards by pointing fingers toward Mark Kriegel, who initiated all of this, and Tessitore, in order to make them feel uncomfortable being racially biased, where next time they will be forced to think twice before doing so. However, would you believe Shakur Stevenson thought it was a good idea to thank Timothy Bradley for calling him boring? Now, it's one thing...
Well, I don't know. One could have also taken that in the way. I'd have to see what he fully said, but one that can also take that in a way that he actually was criticizing Timothy Bradley in his own weird way. But I get what AKHi TV is saying.
If Shakur is not aware.
Now, even if Shakur Stevenson, if he does criticize them, do I think all in all that is really going to stop them from criticizing him? Not really. But we'll see what happens.
Of the double standards in the sport. But it's literally happening right in front of his face. To that man in the mirror, himself. A few months ago, he came out and said that they hate black people, which I reported on it. So Shakur knows what time it is. All of this boring talk is nothing.
Lomachenko and Fury bias. Now, I agree overall maybe with a little bit of Lomachenko, but what Fury bias overall is there out there? But of course, this is the same idiot that alleged that Tyson Fury, that he cheated and all sort of bullshit. It's no offense against AKHi TV, but this dude really is not one of the sharpest tools, in the drawer.
But code words. That's why it makes...
Or the sharpest knife in the drawer, I should say.
Makes no sense instead of Shakur using his platform to bring awareness, at least to his own situation. He does the complete opposite. Now, I need y'all to follow me here. I'm not asking Shakur Stevenson to call Mark Kriegel and Tessitore racist. All I'm saying, Shakur Stevenson needs to make these people feel uncomfortable with their own skin, being racially biased. If you may wonder, how can he accomplish that?
Do you feel uncomfortable in your own skin when you get proven wrong on a lot of your takes? When people come back in the comment section and basically blister up the comment section? People don't usually change. They don't usually change unless they get proven so wrong repeatedly or something traumatic happens. So, it is what it is.
Very simple. Whenever old media asks Shakur Stevenson about being boring, all he has to do is respond with a simple rhetorical question, which is, did you say that about Lomachenko when he lost to Teofimo Lopez, where he only landed 6 punches for 6 entire rounds because he was too busy moving around, aka running around, according to old media?
I would agree. And you know what? That's actually what running is. Vasyl Lomachenko did nothing but run around in those first 6 rounds against Teofimo Lopez. Vasyl Lomachenko, he can claim all this bullshit that, I thought I at least deserved the draw and all sort of bullshit. No, you didn't. Vasyl Lomachenko, he's coming up with all these bullshit excuses. Oh, I hurt my shoulder. I did all that. Whatever, dude. Like, if you wanted to win that fight, you needed to put everything on the line. You knew that Teofimo Lopez was an A-grade puncher, but you were supposed to be the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter. And Vasyl Lomachenko's opponents from now on. Now, Vasyl Lomachenko, in my opinion, is an A-grade fighter. And at one point in time, I ranked him as the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter overall because I thought that he clearly deserved it. But the opponents that he could possibly face a little bit later on, there's going to be some big matchups out there for him. I'm not going to necessarily say that if he loses to a Gervonta Tank Davis, that would mean that he's necessarily overstated or that at one point in time he was overrated. But if you can't even defeat the Devin Haney's or the Shakur Stevensons or possibly even a Teofimo Lopez in a rematch, that'll tell me overall that you never were really as good as many people, including myself, thought you were. That you were almost another, I'm not going to say Yuriorkis Gamboa case when it comes down to it, but that, all in all, that really when it came to facing those real A-class fighters, all in all, at least, you sort of lost to them. We'll see what happens. Now, I do think Lomachenko beat a multitude of A-class fighters, don't get it wrong. But is Vasyl Lomachenko, is he someone overall that could eventually creep back into the top 10 pound-for-pound? Or is he someone overall that is going to lose a lot of those A-class fights at 135 pounds? We'll see what happens.
Did you label Lomachenko a boring fighter because of that? That's what Shakur Stevenson should have had asked old media, from Timothy Bradley, Mark Kriegel, Tessitore, and any reporter that brought up that question. That's how you get the job done and put people in check, by exposing the double standards in a form of a question. Let them hang themselves. You just give them the rope, because when it comes to reporters, one thing they hate is to be exposed for being biased. See, being a fighter nowadays is not enough. These fighters have to get informed and challenge these reporters in order to put...
Some of these reporters overall, man, they don't give a shit. Like AKHi TV, man, this dude gets, you know, exposed for being biased all the goddamn time. He don't give a shit. AKHi TV is one of the most biased and one of the most, you know, dopiest dudes out here. And this dude, all in all, you know, he'll just go out and do it the next day. These reporters, man, I'm not saying that it don't bother them if a fighter speaks out against them, but they continue doing the same shit. Shakur Stevenson, in my opinion, he just needs to worry about trapping Oscar Valdez in the corner and trying to get the biggest fights. And then eventually, Top Rank is not going to have enough for you anyway. Just go over to Showtime or DAZN or wherever you think you need to go. Because how many big fights are really going to be there for him anyway? I suppose Vasily Lomachenko, Teofimo Lopez maybe, if he wants to take that fight. And I guess Oscar Valdez. You know, besides then, after those, you pretty much can leave Top Rank anyway. That's, you know, you may not even decide to face Lomachenko. You may want to face overall, you know, Devin Haney or Gervonta Tank Davis. You know? So, it is what it is. However, what I will say is this. Once again, Shakur Stevenson, once upon a time, he was calling out Vasily Lomachenko. And that seemed when Vasily Lomachenko, when he knew overall that Vasily Lomachenko was a little bit busy with other work. So is Shakur Stevenson, is he still going to have that same energy now that Bob Arum, he's trying to sick Vasily Lomachenko after him? We'll see what happens.
In their place. If not, they will step over you. And to make matter worse, fighters the likes of Oscar Valdez hide behind commentators and reporters such as Testator and Mark Kriegel, including Timothy Bradley. You never heard Timothy Bradley call Lomachenko boring, and you never will, because he goes by the code. That's what you call an Uncle Tom. Testator, yes, a boss. Whatever you say will go across. That's what Shakur has to
This fucking dude. Oh, boy.
realize. So instead of thanking Timothy Bradley, he should have checked Timothy Bradley. Because I know what they manipulate Shakur Stevenson with. Oh, this is prize fighting. You have to sell tickets. You have to become a bigger star. You do that by being exciting. But wait, how come that same logic don't apply to Lomachenko? How come you never...
Well, if we are also going to be real about Lomachenko, Lomachenko doesn't really fight the same way that Shakur Stevenson does. Lomachenko overall is usually an offensive master. Now, Shakur Stevenson, you know, he still has a great offense, but it's going to be looked less upon because he's usually fighting on the back foot. You can be offensive fighting on the back foot. There's no problem with that. But Lomachenko, his style is basically, he's going to try to go in there, he's going to try to wear you down, and he's going to try to break you down. That's what Lomachenko does.
said that about Lomachenko. He has to sell tickets too. Matter of fact, he can't even sell tickets, which I'm going to elaborate on that in a few. See, this is only one performance. Would you guys believe Mark Kriegel said he's willing to forgive Oscar Valdez for cheating because of the previous fights he had? They were great fights, and he's not willing to throw him under the bus just for cheating one time. But he's...
Well, in my opinion, like I said, this is my view. It doesn't really matter who it is. You know, steroids, and like I said, a certain amount of people may disagree with me. I'm not saying that it's a great thing, and I'm not saying that you should not get penalized. But a lot of these fighters, I don't really know what the hell they're on anyway. Like, a lot of these fighters, I believe, are potentially on steroids anyway. So, to me, the steroids, unless you're like a John Jones case or something to where you get caught like literally like 3 to 4 times within a span of like 5 years, like, to me, it's just, you know, it's just not that huge of a deal to me. At least it's not, you know, to the point to where I can, you know, derail your whole career, or, you know, I can constantly criticize you because of it. The only way that I believe that affects your greatness is if, you know, like I said, let's say we're talking about UFC. The reason why I bring up UFC is because it's, you know, it's easier to bring it up that way. If we're comparing, let's say, George St. Pierre and John Jones, you know, or Anderson Silva, George St. Pierre and John Jones, those are debatably 3 of the greatest fighters ever. You could maybe put Khabib Nurmagomedov in that conversation as well if you wanted to. Some people, of course, would say he doesn't have the title defenses of those guys, as whatever. But at the end of the day, Khabib beat some great competitors, and he's the most dominant fighter the UFC has ever seen. Not even close. So it is what it is. At the end of the day, we can sit here and take a look and say, okay, well, George St. Pierre, John Jones, Anderson Silva, they're all pretty skilled in a very similar category. And we can all argue about who the most complete fighter is. And when you talk about accomplishments and title defenses, that goes with George St. Pierre and John Jones and Anderson Silva. Now, George St. Pierre and John Jones, in terms of skill set, in terms of a certain amount of other things, they're very even on a lot of playing fields. But when it comes down to other things, if you wanted to maybe say, well, you know what, I would personally put George St. Pierre over John Jones because John Jones, all in all, you know, he tested positive for PEDs about 3 separate times in his career. George St. Pierre never tested positive for PEDs even once. So that would mean, all in all, that I know for sure, at least from the surface level, that all in all, that he was somewhat of a fair performer. At least he was never officially caught. John Jones was. And Anderson Silva was a little bit later on as well. So, you know, if you wanted to use something like that, that's understandable. But to me, it's just not enough overall to derail someone from a number 1 pound-for-pound spot, or, you know, so something like that. Unless the categories are so entirely close. That's why I still have Canelo Alvarez as my number 1 pound-for-pound fighter. Because if you compare him to any other fighter of the day, there's not another fighter, in my opinion, that is as skilled as Canelo Alvarez. You know, at least not quite. There's not another fighter that has his resume. There's not another fighter that has his accomplishments. So I can't put Terrence over him. I can't put Errol Spence over him. I can't put Fury over him. I can't put Usyk over him. I can't put any of those fighters over him. Because all those fighters, in my opinion, would be in my top 5 pound-for-pound.
Willing to throw Shakur under the bus just for one lackluster performance, and forgetting about all of the great fights he had on ESPN. How ironic is that? More importantly, how come Timothy Bradley, Tessitore, Mark Kriegel never said the same thing about Lomachenko, though, when he lost to Tio? Keep the same energy, don't flip. The same logic should apply to Lomachenko.
I agree with you, AKHi, but let's also be real. You flip a lot too. You don't keep the same energy with almost anyone. You know, you protect a lot of these American black fighters because you wish that you were black when it comes down to it, so it is what it is.
If this is about entertainment, becoming a star, selling tickets, excitement, so on and so forth. See, I know Timothy Bradley is trying to brainwash Shakur Stevenson by mentioning all of these talking points. He probably even tells Shakur, I'm not an Uncle Tom. I'm just being objective. But what Shakur Stevenson should ask Uncle Tom Bradley, if you are being objective, why you never said you almost fell asleep watching Lomachenko?
He calls Timothy Bradley Uncle Tom Bradley. People should start calling AKHi TV wannabe black AKHi, because that's all he is.
Lose to Teofimo Lopez in a stinking fashion. Why are you only critical of black fighters, Uncle Tom Bradley? We all know what time it is. Lomachenko got the complexion for the connection to get the ultimate protection. You guys think it was a coincidence ESPN erasing Lomachenko loss? That's why Timothy Uncle Tom Bradley sticks to the code. Remember, Timothy Bradley said Terrence Crawford beats Floyd Mayweather, but with that same breath, he said Lomachenko is a better fighter than Terrence Crawford, and he's pound for pound number 1.
Right, but that wasn't necessarily all in all because Timothy Bradley, like, I understand if certain people overall want to say that Timothy Bradley, that, you know, maybe he's a little bit more critical of black fighters. But just because he ranked Lomachenko number 1 pound for pound, there was a bunch of people that ranked Lomachenko number 1 pound for pound, not just Timothy Bradley. And that was understandable because even if we still want to go there, Lomachenko to this day has a better resume than Terrence Crawford. Let's be real.
Even though he believes prom for prom, Bud Crawford beats pretty boy Floyd Mayweather. What kind of twisted logic is that? Nevertheless, back...
But of course, Floyd Mayweather Jr., when it comes down to it, I don't think Timothy has ever liked Floyd Mayweather Jr., so it is what it is.
To the point. The million-dollar question. Why are they so quick to call Shakur boring, but not Lomachenko? The answer is in the question. It's all about the yin and the yang. Because if you compare Shakur versus Jamaya to how Lomachenko fought Teofimo Lopez, it's like comparing the way Mike Tyson fights to Muhammad Ali, where Mike Tyson is Shakur Stevenson in this equation. That's how much more aggressive Shakur fought than Lomachenko did. But Pete did.
Well, what I'm going to say is this: he didn't fight super duper aggressive in that Nakatili fight or whatever the hell that dude's name was. But Vasily Lomachenko, at the end of the day, he should have put on a hell of a lot of a better performance, or at least tried in that fight against Teofimo Lopez. And if Lomachenko is going to go into that Teofimo Lopez, rematch, that's if Teofimo even grants him a rematch when it comes down to it. Lomachenko is going to have to take chances. He can't just stare at him for the first 6 rounds. I understand that Teofimo, he's a very hard puncher. But you're supposed to be one of the master boxers in the world. And I do agree that he is one of the top boxers in the world, no doubt about it. But if you're on the level that a lot of people overall said that you were, all right, you got to put on a much better performance than that. At least make the fight competitive. Which he sort of did in that, first fight. It was at least 8 rounds to 4. But, you got to do a hell of a lot more than just run around the ring for the first 6 rounds.
They call Shakur boring in winning, but Lomachenko the Matrix in losing. Furthermore, what would you expect from Uncle Tom Timothy Bradley? They called him boring his entire career. I'm not saying he was. Bradley was an action-packed fighter. I'm just saying that's what they called him. Old media, that is. Now he's pretending as if he never dealt with that double standard. Again, Tessitore, yes, a boss.
Well, if we actually are going to talk about Timothy Bradley, I thought that he was a very decent fighter, but, there was a couple of very, very entertaining fights that he had. He had that all-time great fight with Ruslan Provodnikov. He had a decent fight against Jesse Vargas. But Timothy Bradley, when it came down to it, it's not like he was a complete joy to watch throughout his whole entire career. He was a very decent boxer, don't get it wrong, but, Timothy Bradley, it's not like everyone was on the edge of their seats because Timothy Bradley, all in all, was going to fight. It is what it is.
I will do that for you. I will follow the script. You don't even got to tell me. I'm going to read your mind. Yes, a boss. What's even more disappointing is that Andre Ward is as bad as Timothy Bradley nowadays, even though they called him boring as well. But okay, you have guys like Hopkins, who was a great fighter. Boring. Ward, great fighter, but they're boring.
Bernard Hopkins is actually one of those fighters that I don't prefer to watch. Because Bernard Hopkins, so many people, they love to call him a top 10 fighter of all time. Hopkins has to be the most overrated fighter that I've personally ever seen in my life. He literally lost the majority of his big matchups. That's not me saying that he didn't win some of the big ones. Like, obviously, he beat Tito Trinidad, who was a very limited fighter, but, he still was one of the top pound-for-pound fighters, so let me not try to, disengage that win, or let me not try to, what the hell is the word that I'm looking for? Let me not try to discredit him. But when it comes down to it, besides the Felix Tito Trinidad win and the Oscar De La Hoya win and the Kelly Pavlik win, all those fighters, first of all, Oscar De La Hoya, he should have never even been in that weight class in the first place. Oscar was never heavier overall, in my opinion, than really a natural welterweight, but it is what it is. And then on top of that, when it comes down to it, you have Felix Tito Trinidad. Now, he was a, decent middleweight, so I don't necessarily have a problem with that. And Kelly Pavlik was a decent fighter, but I wouldn't necessarily call him a great one. But in a lot of the other fights that Bernard Hopkins had, like when he had big matchups against Chad Dawson, I believe, and Jermaine Taylor, he lost those fights. When he had a big fight against Joe Calzaghe, who was a greater fighter than Bernard Hopkins. I don't give a shit what anybody says. Joe Calzaghe was more skilled at the end of the day than Bernard Hopkins when it came down to it. And there was a reason why he was undefeated versus why Bernard Hopkins had several losses in his career. It is what it is. Bernard Hopkins was not as great as Joe Calzaghe, and he certainly was not as great as Roy Jones Jr. I don't give a shit what anybody says. Bernard Hopkins has very quickly became the most overrated boxer of all time. I don't even think there's a close second. For losing how many big matchups that he did in his career, that's not even including the prime loss to Roy Jones Jr. Now, of course, he beat Roy Jones Jr. a little bit later on, but that was after basically the, who the hell did he lose to? The Antonio Tarver fight. Everyone knows that Roy Jones Jr. was completely done after that Antonio Tarver fight. It took him literally 20 years later to finally defeat Roy Jones Jr. Like, ain't nobody count that win. I'm sorry, but Bernard Hopkins, he's a very, very overrated fighter. Don't get me wrong, great in his own right. Top 50 boxer of all time. But when people rank him within the top 10 and top 20, no, dude, that's just ridiculous. I can name you 10 fighters off the top of my head, 15 fighters that I put over Bernard Hopkins. I would put, in all honesty, this is my opinion, I may put Andre Ward over Bernard Hopkins. Andre Ward was hands down a more skilled fighter, better defensively in my opinion than Bernard Hopkins, better offensively when it came down to it, and he retired undefeated. I would put Andre Ward over Bernard Hopkins because he at one point in time, not only was he undefeated, he all in all had great competition, and on top of that was the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the sport. Bernard Hopkins was never the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the sport. I don't give a shit what anybody says. All right? Bottom line.
Right? So that's probably why Timothy probably was saying.
That's all he said.
So both Tim and Andre Ward know what time it is. Matter of fact, what Shakur Stevenson and Devin Haney are going through today is exactly to a T what Floyd Mayweather already went through. Floyd Mayweather will put on all of these exciting fights and have one lackluster performance, then they call him boring. Check it out for yourself.
And Diego pulls himself up by the ropes. He doesn't look like he has much left, Jim. No,
If you've never seen that Floyd Mayweather Jr. versus Diego Corrales fight, that is one of the top 5 performances in Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s career. Excellent, excellent performance.
Right hand, another knockdown, fifth knockdown of the fight, fifth knockdown of Corrales' career. Another mark of what a performance it's been.
terrific fight, terrific performance by Floyd Mayweather.
But you know, if you don't get, I don't think we've given Mayweather that much credit. He got in there and took some shots himself.
Well,
Never gave up.
the night that he destroyed Corrales, he got a lot of credit, and he deserved it. He was brilliant that night. The night that he tore up Genaro Hernandez, he got a lot of credit, and he deserved it.
If Floyd Mayweather Jr.
That's against DeMarcus Chop Chop Corley. DeMarcus Chop Chop Corley, he pretty much was a C-class fighter, but DeMarcus Corley, he could give you hell, man. Like, he gave Miguel Cotto hell in the first couple rounds in that fight. He stumbled him a couple times. Floyd Mayweather Jr., he almost knocked Floyd Mayweather Jr. out, I believe, in that fight. Like, he hit him with a hell of a right hand, I think it was. He had Floyd Mayweather Jr. up against the ropes, and he was in deep, deep shit in that fight. Like, a lot of people may not remember, Corley, but, he wasn't really ever a fighter that, was super duper elite. But he was someone that could give you some problems.
Could be as solid out of the ring as he is in the ring. He might achieve the stardom that he so desperately wants.
What he wants is to be the biggest attraction in the sport. What he says right now is, I'm the most talented fighter in the sport. I ought to be the best paid.
Well, then he should have been a golfer, where the guy who finishes #1 gets the most money. In this game, it's the guy who puts the most behinds in the most seats that gets paid the most.
And will that crowd...
Well, I would agree. But then Floyd Mayweather Jr. eventually, he created a very, very good, role for himself. And all in all, Floyd Mayweather Jr., he was able to become, the biggest attraction in the sport.
He'll come for Floyd if he continues to win his fights?
It's conceivable if he fights more big fights and fights this way. Never going to reach the plateau of a De La Hoya. That's a rare plateau.
Well, let me say this. I understand overall why he said that at the time, but I am very glad that Floyd Mayweather Jr. became as popular as he became. But a big part of the reason why that was is because he fought so many elite fighters, and all in all, he was undefeated. Not only that, but of course he is an all-time great fighter. But there, a certain amount of the people when they watch Floyd, I'm not saying all in all that a certain amount of people would not watch him because of his skills, but a certain amount of people would watch him mainly because they would hope for him to get beat. It is what it is. A certain amount of hatred. What's surprising is that a certain amount of your haters actually may watch you more than a certain amount of the people that love you, or a certain amount of the people that like you. That may surprise some people, but all in all, hatred overall, it runs deep within a lot of people. A lot of people get jealous, or they really, really hope that you lose. I guarantee you that a big part of the reason why Mayweather was such a big attraction is because there was more people almost every single fight hoping that he would lose than overall hoping that he would win.
But he could later on in his career fight some of the top guys and be an attraction.
If he fights this way, to be crowd-pleasing, could it shorten or compromise his career?
It could. But what choice does he have if he wants to be the popular fighter that he claims he should be?
King of the game.
Just heard him say, Jim, his hand hurts.
Well, he used it a lot. CombiBox numbers showed Mayweather throwing 600 punches and landing 283, and at least half of those were power shots. Corley 150 out of 657, and he took a lot of leather. But Mayweather was moving up to 140 pounds. In his last fight at 135, fighting Philip Endu in a very offensive style, he knocked Endo out in the 7th round.
An outstanding performance by Mayweather.
There's Victor Ortiz. Man, Victor Ortiz, he was very, very big, I believe, in the late 2000s and the early 2010s when it came down to it. Victor Ortiz was never the same after that Floyd Mayweather Jr. fight, but to be quite honest with you, I don't think Victor Ortiz was ever really that great of a fighter anyway. That's not me trying to, not give the win to Floyd, but I'm not, it doesn't really matter anyway, because Floyd has so many more, much more greater wins in his career. Like Ricky Hatton, in my opinion, was a much greater fighter than Victor, and Miguel Cotto, of course, Marquez, Pacquiao, even Maidana. All those fighters were greater than Victor. Victor was a decently talented fighter, but he was a person overall that, first of all, in my opinion, never really had a great chin. And on top of that, he had skills, but, if you were able to adapt against him, he kind of wore down. And we've seen that very early on in his career against Marcos Maidana.
The flaws in Ortiz. He seized on them. He took some of Ortiz's good shots. For once, we can all say he was exciting in the ring.
Anyways, that seems to be about it for this video, but I just thought that I would review that all in all, because I do think all in all that, Shakur Stevenson, is he getting called boring because he more than likely is a black fighter? I do believe so, but we'll see all in all what happens. Anyways, I'm going to be very interested to see what Shakur Stevenson, where he goes from here. We're going to see all in all what he has to say or who he's going to fight. I think it'll be very, very interesting. We'll see what happens. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.